Okay, hello and welcome to the sixth and final round of the U.S. Amateur Team East. As we saw going into this round, unfortunately, we had stumbled quite a bit as a team going into this round. We had just a 3.5 out of 5 score, which was tremendously disappointing as one of the top seeds, but these things very much can happen. It's a very short event, and so one misstep at the wrong time can very much cost you the tournament, which is what happened. And so in this final round, we were not really competing for any top place or anything. This was just for fun. And so we ended up playing against a not actually as bad a team on paper as we might have expected from only having 3.5 points. We were still individually playing against a master level player, which is a little bit surprising, but certainly still a very real challenge for the final round. But kind of a good pairing with the white pieces. It's good to have still a bit of a challenge going into a last round that you might not have expected. The worst thing that can happen, the thing that you really don't want, is you're playing a meaningless game in the last round against like somebody that you should beat 100 times out of 100 that you're not going to get any rating for, and have to grind out like some long position. It's kind of it can feel like a waste of time, even if it is still always fun to get a chance to play an over the board game of chess. So I was pretty happy with the pairing to play against a master. I didn't do a lot of opening preparation for this game, unlike all of the others, because again, the result of this match was kind of meaningless at this point. I just wanted to sit down, not think too hard, have fun with the game. And so I didn't really know what to expect from my opponent. I just continued with my normal repertoire. So after e4, e5, knight f3, my opponent chose the Petrov, which I was very happy to see, because the Petrov is one of the few openings that I have actually done some very deep preparation into, mostly from the black side, because I used to play it myself. But because I've looked at a lot of critical lines for against the Petrov from the black side, I have quite a bit of tools in my arsenal to try to dismantle it from the white side as well, and I actually score phenomenally well against the Petrov, even against Grandmaster level players. I think I have like more than an 80% score from this position. So I was very happy to see this. So knight takes e5. I was a little concerned that my opponent would go for this knight takes e4 line, because then we could end up in this kind of annoying situation where we do get just a much better position out of the opening, but we do have to grind this endgame for a very long time. And I really wasn't in the mood to try to grind out a very long endgame in a final round that didn't really matter for the standings. So I was happy that my opponent instead played the classical approach with d6. We slid back to f3, 94. Now white has two big systems that can be tried. One is to play d4, basically staking claim to the center immediately and arguing that this knight on e4 is a weakness because it can be harassed by bishop to d3. For example, immediately here, bishop to d3. If black plays bishop to d6, white can play c4, undermining support of this knight, preparing queen c2 as well to put even more pressure on the knight. There's a lot of theory that's developed around this d4 move. The other move is what I played. There's also other moves as well. I mean, white can play c4 is a line that's been had some popularity recently. White can play d3, which is a much more measured approach to try to get a safe position. But the other main line is to play knight to c3, which puts an immediate challenge to the black knight on e4. Says, okay, you can destroy my pawn structure, which is what he does. But white now has a very serious lead in development. White is intending to castle queenside because this pawn configuration, even though it's a little bit compromised from a structural perspective, gives a lot of protection to this king on the queen side, where the king will stand very safe on c1 or b1 if it ends up moving there. And so this gives white sort of a free hand to try to attack on the king side, just sort of launch the pawns down the board, get some kind of attack going. And because we've taken away from the center, this actually opens up both the bishop and the knight, sort of similar to like why black doesn't mind the exchange variation of the Ruy Lopez. So white has a space advantage, white has a small advantage in development, but black's position is very solid. And so after bishop e7, bishop e3, typically white starts with this. White could also start with bishop d3. It is possible, but as we talked about in game one, you generally prefer to start with the moves that you know you're going to make. The dark square bishop always belongs on e3 in these positions. Very rarely it can go to f4, but most of the time it's going to go to e3. Whereas this bishop might want to go to d3 or it might want to go to c4, depending on the line that the black chooses. And so we generally start with bishop e3. Black castles, queen d2, intending to castle queenside. And now black has a wide choice. The main move is to play knight to c6, and again, there's a lot of theory that's developed around this move. But in this game, my opponent chose knight to d7, which is the modern approach to the Petrov that was introduced by Fabiano Caruana in his World Championship match against Magnus Carlsen. I think 2016... I forget if it was 2016 or 2018. I want to say 2016. So quite some time ago now. But the idea of this 97 move is that after castles, black is going to bring the knight to f6, where it will aid in support of the king side and also help control the d5 square. So black can go ahead and play d5, stake a claim to the center, while also not worrying quite as much about sort of YOLO king side launch as black normally would. But it does cost time, is the downside. Black has already, you know, sort of down a tempo because of the way that the opening has been played. You know, black has made 3 moves with this knight, only to exchange it off. So white has a severe lead in development. And black is now exacerbating that by taking 2 moves to transfer the knight over the king side. So it's a very provocative approach, and it's one that I think my opponent in this game was a very young master. A lot of young players don't appreciate the sort of danger that you're exposing yourself to by playing these sorts of moves, knight to d7 to knight f6. It's similar with like these AlphaZero approaches where you just kind of play h4, h5 in like any position. A lot of younger players, they've just grown up with that being the main line. So they're like, they don't know they're doing something risky. Like they don't really think about it. They just kind of they play the line, and then they only like later realize like, oh, there is a reason that this took so long for people to come up with. You know, computers are better than humans at chess, but humans aren't stupid. If h4, h5 was like unquestionably good in like every position, or if knight d7, knight f6 was unquestionably good in this position, we would have come up with it. And there are lots of positions where white has come up with like h4, h5. You know, the dragon variation of the Sicilian, the Carol Khan, even as far back as like the 50s, 60s, 70s, like people understood the strength of it. So it's not like completely foreign ideas. But often these younger players they don't see anything wrong with it. You know, where somebody that's grown up with h4, knight d7, knight f6, whatever, like wasting time in these openings, like in an era where that was considered kind of bad, would squint at these moves and be like, maybe, but you really have to justify it. And so in this game, or in general, I'm very, very happy to see my opponent play this line, because unless they're very, very booked up, I used to play this line with black, and the lines are insane. You have to have some like very, very, very serious preparation ready to justify playing these sorts of lines. And even if you do, a lot of the lines end in positions that are by no means just stable equality. You often end up in like crazy material imbalances. I remember looking at some lines in this opening that ends in like an endgame where white has 6 pawns for a rook. And it's objectively equal, but you kind of have to figure out, like, there's still a lot of play left in the position. And so I'm generally quite happy to see this from the white side, since I can almost guarantee that I will know more than my opponent in this particular variation. So white plays bishop to d3 generally. Now, you know, with the knight on f6, it's very clear that the bishop belongs on d3. On c5, it'll just be kicked away with d5 eventually. And so we prefer to have it on this diagonal where it puts pressure on h7. Black is basically forced to play c5. This is one of the points of bringing the knight to f6, is black is staking a claim to the center, while also opening an avenue for the queen to generate counterplay. White centralizes the pieces. So again, White's play is very straightforward. Like, White has not done anything special. We've just put all of our pieces on very sensible squares, and we're prepared to take advantage of the weakness of this center that Black is creating by just centralizing our pieces and putting some very, very serious pressure. And so in this position, White's plan is to play the move bishop to g5, which has two purposes. One is to put pressure on the d6 pawn indirectly by threatening to take on f6, and the other is to open an avenue for the queen to transfer to the king side, where Black can fall under an immediate, just serious attack. You know, this h7 pawn is actually quite difficult to defend. And so in this position, Black is basically forced to play the move bishop e6. And I don't use these words lightly. You know, generally when I really try to shy away from saying the word forced, because it's very overused in chess. People like to say, oh, such and such is forced, but when in fact, you know, there are many, many perfectly good options. What they actually mean is like this move is like slightly better than the other ones. But this is just how the line works. I mean, Black has played very provocatively, so you actually don't have a lot of choices at any stage. You have to play, you know, some only move at pretty much every stage of the game. And so after bishop g5, Black is actually got pretty much, again, obligated to play d5. And after queen f4, to prepare for the the attack of queen h4 with the move rook to e8. And now it turns out that this attack is not immediately dangerous, because Black has cleared a square for the bishop to defend the king side. Even here, it's still dangerous, but Black is just doing just enough to survive. If Black does not do that, and instead plays a move queen to a5, which is what my opponent played, Black is actually almost pretty much lost on move. You know, we're only on move 11, but Black's position is completely lost. And that, you know, that that is the danger of this line. If you make even one slight misstep, and queen a5 is a very sensible move, you know, it does seem to be the reason that you played c5. It seems like you need to generate counterplay somehow, but game's almost over already, just off the bat. And so I was familiar with this idea. I knew that queen a5 was bad. And the reason is that after the simple move a3, the queen is just misplaced. You know, the queen was needed to aid in the defense, and now that it's not there, this idea of starting a kingside attack is incredibly powerful. Just pretty much ends the game on the spot. So my opponent played the move rook e8, which is needed because White is already threatening to take on c5 and open a discovered attack on Black's dark square bishop. So rook e8 is pretty much forced. The only other option is bishop e6, trying to close down the e-file. But after knight g5, the bishop is not going to survive, and White is positionally just completely winning. So rook e8. White continues with the plan. Again, you know, White doesn't need to do anything fancy. There's just nothing to discuss. And after queen f4, now my opponent started to spend quite a lot of time, because I think at this point he realized the situation is really quite dire. If Black now tries for d5, then after queen h4, h6, this very, very typical piece sacrifice. Since this queen is not back on d8, and this is a critical point, Black is not able to play bishop f8 to secure the king side anymore. White would simply take the knight. And so Black is simply left without any good options of how to defend this position. White has immediate threats of capturing on e6, sacrificing even more material to open the rest of the king side. For example, if Black tries to bring the queen back to defend the knight and intend bishop f8, after rook takes e6, takes, check. Wherever the king goes, either to f8 or h8, White will follow up with knight to g5 or knight to e5, probably knight to g5, threatening knight f7 mate, and Black has no defense. Rook f8 would be the only thing to try, but White can execute this very, very common maneuver of forcing the king back to h8 to reposition the bishop with check. And after bishop f5, king g8, bishop e6, White is delivering checkmate on the board after having sacrificed a full rook for the attack. So it's very hard to suggest a move for Black. You know, what do you even do? Probably the only like attempt at a defense is queen back to d8, just wasting, like, admitting that you wasted a move. But it's hard to believe that that's going to be enough to try to save the position at all. White has a number of ways of how to continue after bishop queen d8. One is, for example, to play bishop b5, harass the rook, force it to move, and then just go ahead and take this pawn on d6. Black taking with the pawn would be pretty suicidal from a positional perspective, so white is simply winning a pawn for no compensation. But white could also just try to continue the attack. You know, queen h4 and sacrificing the piece still needs to be considered. H4 needs to be considered. Rook e3 is possible. Trying to transition the rook to the king side. There's a lot of pleasant choices for white in this position. And so my opponent tried to solve his problems tactically. Maybe this was intention with queen a5, maybe not. But he played the move c4, which seems like a good tactical idea if you haven't seen this position before, but fortunately I have. I was aware, I didn't remember the refutation offhand, but I was aware that c4 did not work in this position because it was something that I had checked back in the day. And so I spent some time here to figure out exactly how to refute the idea. The point is black is sacrificing a pawn just to open up the fifth rank for the queen. And now after takes, black's idea is to play knight h5. Now if white plays a move like queen h4, which would be very, very natural, hitting the knight, then after takes on c4, if white takes his bishop, then the knight is left hanging, so white is forced to take on h5. And now after h6, there's this very, very annoying pin along the h-file. Black will collect a piece and probably the game. White, importantly, isn't able to just go ahead and slide back to attack the bishop because this capture comes with check. So this was my opponent's tactical idea, and so after takes, knight h5, white is not able to play the move queen h4, but I did find the correct tactical solution, which is to slide the queen back to, instead of h4, go to e3, opening up a very, very deadly pin on the e-file. And now if black does go ahead and take on c4, then after bishop takes e7, there is this pin for black. This bishop on e7 is not immediately able to move, but there's no way to generate any additional pressure on the piece. White is prepared to just play queen d4 next move, and the only way to attack the bishop anymore would be queen c7, which tactically fails to the simple move bishop takes d6. White collects a second pawn, and pretty much the game. And if black tries a slower move like d5, queen d4, probably there's better moves as well, but queen d4 is very, very much good enough. White is not only up a pawn, but the attack on the king side is still coming. White's pieces are all better than their counterparts. The knight is better than the knight, the bishop is better than the bishop, the rook is better than the rook, the queen is better than the queen. So it's not just a pawn. Even if even if you gave black the pawn back and put it on like c6 or something, white would have a very comfortable position. So after queen e3, white has simply collected a pawn, and so the question for black now is, okay, I'm down a pawn, how do I make the best of the situation? And my opponent found what I thought was a good practical try in the move d5. This looks like a very strange move because, you know, the whole point of the bishop on being on c4 is that it can't be captured because of this pin. This bishop on e6 is effectively pinned. And so d5, you might wonder, okay, well, isn't this the same pin? Like, what did you accomplish by playing d5? And the thing that scared me off of playing bishop takes d5 was not bishop takes d5, bishop takes e7, which in the same way leads to a position where white is simply up 2 pawns. But I was concerned about the move bishop takes a3, which seemed kind of difficult to deal with. I did calculate taking on a3. It's not really a move that you should think about too hard, really, because it just looks very dangerous, but I did consider it. And here I just felt that this was too dangerous. I mean, I didn't see anything immediate after king b1. If king d2, there is queen d6, and then after c4, trying to defend the bishop, there was this very nice move f6, which hits the dark square bishop and opens up the idea now black can take on d5, because taking on e8 is no longer dangerous. After, for example, bishop h4, takes, white does get 2 rooks for the queen, but the rook is now going to be attacked in addition to a discovered attack on the king. White is basically forced to take, and now black is just winning up a lot of material. So I spent a lot of time trying to decide, okay, after king b1, does black actually have anything here? Like, they can't take on d5 because there are these back rank issues. The move f6 is not serious anymore because we simply take with the bishop. But I was concerned here about the similar idea of h6, and then, again, black is starting to at least brandishing the idea of taking on d5. It's a little less dangerous now, because white does get a lot of material for the queen. But all in all, I mean, even if I didn't see like a concrete reason that black, or a concrete follow for black, I felt this was just too dangerous when I have simpler options available. I actually haven't checked. We can check with the computer if bishop takes d5 is viable. But eventually I went with a much simpler choice. Okay, so bishop takes d5 is actually playable. And I assume the point is that, yeah, after king b1, well, even king d2 is apparently playable. I'm kind of curious why. Queen d6. Okay, it says it's playable because we can go back to c1 and then go to b1. Sure. So the king goes to b1, and yeah, black does not actually have any particular follow-up. But eventually I decided that this was simply no reason to allow complications. I just went ahead and took on e7 to maintain a much safer pawn advantage. This was based partially on some calculation I had done. Now after black recaptures on c4, if black recaptures on e7, then we do take on d5 because this is now a very, very true pin. So my opponent instead took on c4, which is very sensible. And here I just dropped the bishop back to h4. White is threatening to play the move g4, again taking advantage of this pin. And this knight is very, very uncomfortable. So if black plays a move like queen b5, trying to defend the rook, then, well, actually queen b5 is kind of a good move. Let's say a different move. If black plays a bad move, like b5, then after g4, the knight is forced to come back, and once white manages to double the pawns, in addition to being up a pawn, the weakness of the king, this is a very, very easy conversion. Queen b5 actually maybe is a good move, because this does stop g4. Black would simply be able to take now. But here we would swap gears, play knight d4, trade the knight for the bishop, and again, very, very easy conversion. White basically wants to trade any pair of minor pieces, any pair of like unlike minor pieces. We don't really want to trade knights because then the opposite color bishops give black some chances, but any other exchange that we're pretty happy with. Trading the bishops would be good, trading the knight for the bishop would be good, trading the bishop for the knight would be good. Like, you know, we can let our opponent decide which side of the bishop versus knight they want. Either one would make the conversion a lot easier. So my opponent found probably the best move, the only way to stop g4 in a comfortable way, which is to move queen to f5. And here I had originally intended, I had foreseen all of this when I took on e7, but here I spent a lot of time anyway just to make sure that my calculation was correct. Black is intending to bring the knight either to f4 or f6, which is really quite unpleasant. We have to be quite careful. And if we play knight d4, which, you know, again, seems like our immediate plan, trying to get off the minor pieces, then after queen f4, we can achieve our goal of getting some minor pieces off, if we want, and entering this endgame. But there's some immediate problems defending the g2 pawn, is the problem here. And so I wasn't 100% confident that this was winning. Bishop g3 would be very natural, but now we don't want to trade. We do want to trade one pair of minor pieces. We don't want to trade all the minor pieces. This is kind of similar to game 3, where this rook endgame probably is still winning. I think white should have very, very high chances to win the game, even if it's not objectively winning. But why allow this, you know? We could also go for this kind of position with the bishop versus knight, and this should also be not a terribly difficult conversion, but it is a conversion. I mean, white's extra pawn is stuck at the moment. You know, it is doubled. Black is very comfortably going to set up a blockade with pawns on light squares, which is very unpleasant for the dark square bishop. I think black actually has pretty reasonable chances to hold a draw. from here, even though we've achieved our goal of getting some minor pieces off. So I really wasn't feeling knight d4. I didn't think it was particularly good. So that wasn't a move that I was considering all that much, but I was considering a lot of other moves. Like, we still want to take advantage of this knight. So the main way that I was thinking of trying to do this was to move rook to d4, which is what I eventually played. This controls the f4 square and renews the threat of g4. The only question is what to do in case of bishop d7, which is what my opponent ended up playing. Now if we slide back with the queen, then after takes, bring the other rook to e8, queen d2, bishop c6. Black is doing kind of okay. g4 is not serious because the knight is hanging. We could go ahead and take on c4, but it puts the pieces a little bit offside and allows black to break down the structure considerably. I think even this is probably winning after like king b1, bringing the king to safety. But again, very, very complicated. And so I spent quite a lot of time verifying that my idea in this position worked, which was to play the somewhat unintuitive looking move, self-pitting with knight to e5. Looks very scary because, you know, we're putting ourselves in a pin in a way that black can immediately take advantage of, but we are immediately threatening the move g4 as well, and it turns out that that's just too much for black to deal with. We're threatening g4 as well as rook takes d7. Both threats cannot be handled. So we reach this position. My opponent played the move f6, which is sensible. I mean, the only way to try to take advantage of the pin. But after g4, we reach, by very concrete means, an endgame where white has a very, very active rook. Black could take back with the rook if he wants, but then this knight and this pawn are under attack. White will pick up a second pawn and very, very easily win, probably a third as well. So black has to take with the pawn. The idea being that after takes knight f4, now at least the pawn cannot immediately be taken because of knight g2. But as long as white doesn't blunder this fork and instead plays a simple move like bishop g3, white is very easily collecting all of the pawns now. We can take on b7 if black doesn't defend it, if black plays b5. White has a lot of options here. One of the simplest is to enter this rook endgame, play king d2 to control any entry on the e-file, and now these pawns are just not going to be defensible for long enough. And so after bishop g3, my opponent actually just threw in the towel and resigned. I think it was a little premature. We can check what the evaluation here is. Okay, well, it thinks it's white's move. Oh, yeah, because I played b5. Yeah, I mean, it's like a fair time to resign, I guess. We are in a +3 position, but I probably would have played on with black at least a few more moves. I think at this point, my opponent was just kind of wanted to get out of there. Our board 3 by this point had already won the game, won his game in like an hour for a very, very nice checkmating attack, and it seemed like that kind of that was kind of the signal for the rest of the team to wrap it up already. Right immediately after their board 3 lost, their board 2 offered a draw in an exchange at position, just on material for no compensation. Offered a draw, which our board 2 accepted. Very shortly thereafter, my opponent in this game lost, and then very shortly thereafter, our board 4 won as well. So we did finish the final round as a team with a very nice score of 3.5 to a half, which did mean that in all of the matches we won, we had an almost perfect score, 15.5 out of 16. You know, basically as good as you can hope for. But we only finished with a total score of 4.5 out of 6, which was, again, not what we were hoping for as one of the top seeds. I believe that put us in somewhere around 20th place, I think 22nd, 23rd, something like that, which was not the worst result we've had. I mean, one of the worst ones, but not the worst. And more importantly, it was a very, very fun event. These events are the team events in general. I mean, it's really just Team East, honestly. Now that there used to be one other team event that CCA would run up in the Northeast in, I think, Connecticut or something, which was a lot of fun as well. But since they discontinued that, Team East is pretty much the only one of the year, and I very much enjoy them for a lot of reasons. I think the team dynamic adds a lot of a lot of interest to games. It's nice to be playing for somebody other than yourself. You know, chess can be boring. It can be a slog. Oftentimes, when you're defending a bad position or like pressing a slightly better position, you can often start to think to yourself, "What's the point? Like, why am I here? Is this really how I want to be spending my time?" But when you have somebody else to play for other than yourself, then yeah, that is how you want to be spending your time. I think it makes every game feel a lot higher stakes. Where, you know, normally if I'm playing an 1800, I would not have any interest in the game whatsoever. Add the team situation to it, suddenly it's like the most important thing in the world. So that's one facet. Another is that you see a lot of people, you get a lot of games, a lot of pairings. You see a lot of people in the same room that you really wouldn't see otherwise. You know, in an individual event, we talked about this in round three, you don't really get to play many 1800s. It's just not something that occurs all that often. And so it's a new experience in a way. You know, people often lament playing down, and for a good reason. You know, playing down is very negative EV for your rating. It can often be an unpleasant experience if because you're stressed about allowing an upset. You often have to. They do make you work for it. I mean, they're not bad players, so you are working very very hard for very little return if you're sort of calculating hours spent to rating gained sort of thing. Um, but it's a unique experience. You know, it's not something that you really think through the strategy of all that often. You know, how do I choose my openings? What kind of lines do I go for? Do I try to do something very complex? Do I do something that just keeps a stable position so I don't lose and then make like a long game where eventually they'll make a mistake? It's its own unique puzzle in a lot of ways, and so I do hope that there will be more team events in the future. I think Team East obviously has paved the way for at least shown the model that these events can be very, very successful. And so I hope that others will take up the mantle, and eventually we'll start to see more and more of them. You know, as it stands, it's really just the Olympiad, and I don't think I'm qualified for the Olympiad anytime soon for the U.S. But yeah, overall, I mean, our performance was below our standard, but not like a total unmitigated disaster. And individually, we made a 5 out of 6, 5.5 out of 6 score, which, as I said at the beginning and a few times throughout this series, that's kind of the minimum one would expect from a board one of my rating. But it was also very objectively a good performance. I did end up gaining quite a few USCF rating, which doesn't matter. I mean, USCF rating is kind of fake anyway at this point of my career, but it is a good indication that I was having a good event. I probably scored, you know, by raw rating, I think I was probably expected to only score 5 out of 6, something like that. And I did end up having like a 2600 USCF performance rating, which is decent. I mean, it was good to get back on the horse with at least one decent performance this year after a long year of not very, very good performances. All right, that's it for Team East. Thank you all for watching either this video or whatever combination of 6 rounds you observed. My next tournament, not 100% sure yet. I will be posting, I'll mention this on stream or be posting in the Discord, which you can see in the video description below, when I know exactly what tournament it'll be. But at the very least, I will be playing in the a few tournaments in Spain in April, one in Alicante, leading into the Menorca Open, possibly into Sunway, Formentera, around mid-April. So I'm going to be looking for a classical event to play in March between now and then. If there are any good suggestions, I'm open to them. You know, let me know. But if not, I will see you all in a couple months for the next edition of Zach Made Attempts to Play Classical Chess, which will be either in March or April. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you all next time.